Hi, and welcome to episode 137. And today I'm talking about building a culture of well-being without losing productivity. Burnout and psychological injury claims are rising, and at the same time, the evidence linking well-being to performance and retention is really strong. So if you're growing a small or medium-sized business, well-being can feel like an expensive add-on or just something for corporates. But if you stick with me, I will cover the latest Australian statistics, the business case from the research, and also a practical plan that you can run in 12 weeks to lift the performance of your business. So across Australia, work-related mental health claims continue to climb. They now make up a really large share of serious claims, and the median time lost for these claims is many times higher than for other injuries. So if you're a small or medium business, this can have a really huge impact, not just financially for the business, but also emotionally with the empathy for the injured employee, and culturally, because your remaining employees, as much as they may be empathetic to their colleague, they also need to pick up more of the work. And Safe Work Australia estimates that if we removed work-related injuries and illnesses, our economy would be significantly larger every year with more jobs and higher wages. Now, if you just think about that for a minute, you'll see that this is not just a big business or corporates issue. It's actually a growth issue for all businesses and for our economy as a whole. Now, wellbeing got a bit of a bad rap. It was seen as the fluffy stuff, ping pong tables, or being able to go on volunteer days. But, it's really not the fluffy stuff. It's actually a really important part of understanding and supporting our employees. But there's also now an Australia-wide legal and risk lens to consider. So wherever you are in Australia, you are required to identify, consult on, and control psychosocial risks in your workplace. So each state and territory has slightly different requirements. There are guidance in terms of codes of practice that will explain how to do this. And if you haven't heard the term before, psychosocial, it is a bit of a weird term, but it essentially means any hazard in your workplace that isn't physical. So, for example, overwork, underwork, poor workplace relationships, working remotely, not having role clarity, poor organisational justice. All those things can impact on our mental health and well-being, and so can be psychosocial hazards. Now, if you're in Victoria, or you may not be based in Victoria, but if you have one employee or more in Victoria, they've actually got a step further with a specific psychological health regulation. But the intent is consistent across the country, that we need to treat psychosocial risks like we treat physical risks. So we identify the hazards, we consult with workers. I dislike the term, but that's what it's referred to in the legislation because it covers more than just technically employees. And we put in place controls that are reasonably practicable and check that they're working. So what that means is that if you're a small or medium-sized business, you are not expected to do the same as Wesfarmers or Woolworths, who have thousands of employees, but you need to do things that are reasonable for the size of your business and that are reasonably practical for your business. And that's that compliance floor. That's your basics. But you can go further by intentionally building a culture of well-being. And that is where your performance benefits show up. And there are three buckets where well-being has a link to results and shows up there. The first is productivity and quality. The second is retention of your people. And the third is customer outcomes. And then there are two, I'll call them bonus buckets, risk reduction and investor confidence. But let's start with our threes. So the first one, productivity and quality. Now, Harvard Business School reviewed hundreds of studies across more than 1.8 million employees and over 80,000 business units and found a consistent pattern. When employee wellbeing is higher, teams get more done and they make fewer errors. So, where they did experiments where organizations improved the way that work is designed and supported, productivity lifted meaningfully. So, the takeaway was simply that people do better work when their work environment is set up well. I don't know that we needed that huge study to understand that, but anyway, we have the evidence. The second is employee retention. So we know employee turnover is expensive, but for small teams, it really hurts. If you are 20 people and you lose two good performers, you will feel that for months. And the research shows that higher well-being links with lower voluntary turnover. So that is that you get less hiring costs, less lost knowledge, better customer experience. So if we do a quick calculation, think about the last person that you replaced. On top of their salary, add recruitment fees, time to hire, the dip in productivity while the next person ramps up, the load on the team. The costs of turnover are anywhere from 50% of that person's salary through to 200% of that person's salary, depending on the type of role they were in, the period of time that they were with you, and the level of skills and knowledge they had. So let's imagine I have two employees on $100,000 just to keep the math simple. And they leave this year. And one is at the lower end of that percentages in terms of cost to the business. So let's say that turnover cost is 50%, and the other one's at the higher, they're at 200%. If the business has a revenue of, let's say, $5 million per year, that turnover cost is 5% of our revenue. Now, imagine preventing those two this year. That is $250,000 of costs that we don't experience. That's 5% of our revenue we don't have to find. It's huge. And I'm only talking about two people. Okay, number three, customer outcomes. Teams with higher well-being tend to have better customer loyalty. And again, this is a bit of a low, a bit of a low bar, I guess, in terms of we probably should understand this. Because if you have ever been a customer of somewhere where you just feel like the staff just change all the time, what do? You go somewhere else. So, where we have people that are staying with us, and therefore, we know that we're going to get better customer outcomes, the customers are going to be more loyal because they're getting faster response times, they're getting friendlier service, they're getting fewer handoffs to someone else, fewer not my jobs. And over time, this shows up in repeat business, but also in referrals. They send people to you. And, at the Harvard Business Review that I mentioned highlighted this. People who feel supported give better service, and that keeps revenue steadier. Now, recently I saw Renee Richardson-Gosline speak about customer experience strategy. And if you haven't come across her, I recommend looking her up. You can go to LinkedIn or use the robot to find her information. She is a research scientist, a senior lecturer at MIT Sloan, and recognized as one of the world's top 40 professors under 40. And she was very clear that your customer experience is reflective of your employee experience. Just think about that for a moment. Your customer's experience reflects what your employees experience. So, of course, that was music to my ears. And from a well-being lens, we know from the research that it creates more productive team members, which, of course, is a part of having great customer experience. Okay, those two bonus buckets. One, risk and compliance savings. So as mentioned, across Australia, you are required to identify and control psychosocial risks. So when you do the basics well, you're going to reduce the likelihood of long-term loss claims. And Safe Work Australia's latest snapshot shows that psychological injury claims take much longer to resolve than other injuries. So every avoided claim is weeks of capacity you get back in the business and less management time spent on the process. And the second, investor and market view. So there was an Oxford Wellbeing Research Centre that linked around 1 million employees' survey responses to financial results across more than 1,700 listed firms. Companies with higher workplace wellbeing tended to have higher profitability and higher firm value. And the relationship also held when looking ahead, not just at one point in time. So for leaders, this says that the market rewards companies that run people-positive, performance-focused workplaces. And what actually drives the gains? A meta-analysis using the job demands and resources model shows that resources like role clarity, autonomy, useful feedback, growth, fair processes, they are the strongest and most consistent predictors of engagement. And of course, engagement in turn links with good outcomes like customer satisfaction, commitment of your employees, persistence, and performance. So the things that lift well-being are the same things that lift performance. So I feel like this is a no-brainer, right? So why don't we do this? What often stops SMBs from looking at well-being? And I hear things like, this will slow us down. And I would say no, because it's not about adding perks. It's not about becoming another Google or Canva. It is just like, looking at your customer experience, you try and remove friction, right? So this is no different. You are trying to remove friction for your employees by giving clear priorities, fair workload, better one-on-ones. All of these things are going to reduce rework and speed up decisions. Another thing I hear is we can't afford it. And again, most of the controls that we're talking about cost time, not money. So having a structured weekly one-to-one, having a one-page job description, having a culture of giving and receiving feedback, none of these are costing you money, but they will cost you the time to invest. However, I would argue that that time is going to give you better returns in terms of better well-being and performance. Now, you may be wondering, well, if we did that, how soon do we see these performance increases? Some of them immediate, like role descriptions, having one-on-ones that give people clarity. They're going to reduce overload and give more clarity this week, this month. Other things will build over months. As turnover eases, customer consistency improves, you start to see that build and snowball. So a way to check is to pick 2 controls for 1 quarter. So for example, I say we're going to have clear one-page role descriptions and one-on-ones that reduce clear roadblocks. And then we're going to track 1 operational metric like on-time delivery and 1 people metric like turnover intentions. And many teams will see steadier delivery within 8 to 12 weeks and a drop in the number of people thinking about leaving. And that alone can pay for the effort. There's not a lot of effort, and I would argue it is absolutely your job as a people leader to give people a one-page document that covers their role and to meet with them weekly in a one-on-one. Okay, so the legal requirement gives you the floor, but the evidence that I've discussed from Harvard and Oxford, that gives you the business case. And, there's also some research that also gives you the how. How do we reduce chronic demands? How do we lift the resources that our people need so that we can protect people and protect performance at the same time? Now, there is a simple model to use. It's called the job demands and resource model. And I like it because it's quite clear and it's practical. So job demands are the parts of the work that cost us energy. So things like high workload, time pressure, emotional strain. Job resources are the parts of the work that give energy and enable performance. Things like role clarity, autonomy, feedback, support, fair processes. And a recent meta-analysis shows resources are the strongest and most consistent predictors of work engagement, and particularly personal and developmental resources like resilience, optimism, proactivity, learning opportunities, and feedback, which also showed the strongest relationship to engagement. And as I mentioned, engagement itself relates strongly to outcomes like satisfaction and commitment. So if you enable resources for your people, you will lift energy and performance. So a 3-step method you can run in 12 weeks. The first one is map the work reality. And the way that you do that is you ask your team. Ask them 3 things. What makes great work here? What gets in the way? What's one change that would help you do your best work? And out of those, look for patterns. You may see things like unclear priorities. You may see that sometimes we get really, really busy weeks, and some weeks we get nothing. You may see that they're doing a lot of rework because decisions keep changing or because they don't know what their colleagues are doing. And sort the themes into demands that you want to dial down and resources that you want to dial up. So the second step is that we choose the smallest high impact controls. So we want to pick specific, simple changes. So it could be things like, for role clarity, we want a 1-page role document that has 5 top priorities. It might be around workload. We're going to have a weekly capacity check. So we're going to spot those overloaded weeks early and then move things. After hours work, maybe we have a team rule for response time. We put delayed send on our emails outside of core hours. Support from our management. This is where we might have weekly or fortnightly one-on-ones that focus on priorities and roadblocks. A change management. Maybe we need to have a standard change brief with purpose and timeline, who's impacted, how success is measured. So document what you are changing and why, and discuss it with your teams, because that supports consultation, which is a requirement, and also builds trust. And step 3, measure what matters, and of course, you want to course correct. So we want to track 3 signals for those 12 weeks. The first is output or quality, so for example, on-time delivery. The second is people, so look at sick leave trends or have a 2-item monthly pulse check. The third is risk. So what hazards have been raised? What actions have we taken? And again, we want to involve our team in the measurements and the results, because that also helps to build psychological safety. So I hope that this has given you some practical things to do, but also some thought bubbles about what wellbeing is, because there is no point launching perks like table tennis or potluck lunches, etc., before you fix work design. And don't skip consultation. The people doing the work know where the risks are, and it's also a legislative requirement. And don't treat wellbeing as a campaign. Just make it part of how you run the business, which is really the point of these codes of practices and this new regulation. So your next step is this week, I want you to run those 3 questions, choose 2 controls and trial it for 12 weeks. And if you'd like support, our team at Amplify HR can help you to design and implement the plan for your business. We use our Find, Grow, Keep methodology, hence the name of this podcast, to build your people and culture ecosystem, which will help lift employee wellbeing and engagement and business performance. So you can book a free discovery call by using the link in the show notes. And if you've received value from this episode, I would love it if you could leave a rating or a review over Apple Podcasts or Spotify, so someone else can also find the episodes to help with their business. Episodes are released on Mondays, so click subscribe and you'll be notified of when it's available. Thank you so much for joining me. If you have any feedback, questions, or ideas for future episodes, head on over to amplifyhr.com.au or connect with me on LinkedIn and we can start a conversation.